And then to Deputy Connolly.
Míle mágad agus fáilte romh go léir, fáilte reis agus fáilte raibh an túsa Leonard, Benny Hui Messna Bear, Harish, but anyway. I want to welcome you all, and I want to welcome actually all the briefing documents you gave us. I welcome that. And I've looked at them as best I can. Probably a wiser person would stay quiet and listen more, but we have to ask questions. And so, Mr. Watt, I've re-looked at your opening statement. I welcome confirmation that there's going to be a publication of the post-project reviews, and hopefully within the next few weeks. So that's the clear statement I hear. But I suppose it would have been more helpful if it was included in your opening statement as a recognition of the necessity for that. That would be helpful in instilling confidence, particularly as it was the one item that was identified in the chapter by the Controller and Auditor General. It was a very specific request or recommendation, and it wasn't dealt with in your opening statement. So that's to be regretted, but I welcome that you're now saying you will progress it. Just to clarify a few little things, are we now saying that the policy is to move away from PPPs a little bit? Do you, it has significantly, the Controller's chapter points out that in 2012 it was 6.1 billion, in 2016 it was 9.6 billion. Do you expect that to reduce in the next number of years now? Is there a change in policy?
Thanks, Deputy. So that will depend on future decisions government takes in relation to future projects. Yeah. That the commitments are set out in respect to projects that we've already built and that, yes, that are being operated. So over time, as the unitary payments for the original projects fall away and disappear, they may be replaced by new projects and some of the slack taken up. But I think what we've set out, hopefully reasonably clearly, is that we are cautious about PPPs. We are cautious about there is a new environment now. We're in a position where the Exchequer is in a position to fund traditionally projects in the traditional manner. So I think over time we'll probably see that amount will peak, the overall commitments number. The unitary payments, though, the number of projects that are in the pipeline that haven't been finalised yet, and once those projects are completed, yeah, we'll start paying unitary payments. The unitary payments will get up to about 400 million, I think, at the peak that we're projecting a number of years forth.
400 million.
About 400 million, Deputy, yeah. But you know, the extent to which the government commits to new projects is a matter for policy, yeah, sponsor departments and the government and so on to decide. But we are cautious, and we've set out a new approach to assessing.
Are you cautious as a result of that the economy is better now? Are you cautious as what has led to your caution?
So now? We're cautious about
just explain to me what, yeah, has led to your caution.
So our caution is about the motivation for PPPs. That the motivation should be value for money, yes, but the motivation in the past has also been around the balance sheet treatment, that this enabled us to put things
okay, so the value for money wouldn't have been on the same level as finding a way to build in a difficult environment.
During the recession, yeah, and during the crisis, when we were trying to fund, yeah, in any way we could infrastructure, yeah, to employ people construction workers who were unemployed, and to develop needed infrastructure, there was a focus on the additionality point, and as well as the value for money. But I think we are, and there's more and more evidence. I think Deputy Burke earlier mentioned the report from the European Commission. Yeah. There's a report from the National Audit Office in the UK. There's our own work, which we'll publish shortly. So I think there is, yeah, you know, a concern. Like it's just proving value for money. It's a challenge, and I think over time we'll see what decisions government will take.
Isn't that the kernel, really?
Yeah.
Proving value for money.
Yeah, yeah.
And so what I have before me here is the audit from the EU. I have the one prepared by the Budgetary Office. Yeah. And the theme that's coming from all of it is the difficulty in proving value for money on any level.
Yeah.
Okay. And so what this audit is saying is put the brakes. This one that you
the European Commission, Deputy,
that you read in due course. It's saying put the brakes on PPPs, not to promote a more intensive and widespread use of PPPs until the issues identified are addressed.
Yeah.
So all of them are identifying, and this one from the Budgetary Office and many more are all saying value for money hasn't been established. Just let me finish. Value for money hasn't been established. just forgot the point, but that's why we were all hot under the collar in relation to the post-project reviews not being published, because that would give some indication to us that there was value for money or not. So you can see where we were coming from.
Yeah, I think that will help in terms of establishing whether the benefits of the project were actually delivered.
Yeah.
There'll still be a question mark about the decision that was taken at the time of the contract about whether a PPP option was superior to the traditional approach.
I've often mentioned here, I sat at local level for a long time, 17 years, and I heard this constant refrain that PPPs were excellent and public was bad. There was no evidence whatsoever for that. So it's very worrying. That was the role we went, but absolutely. I actually only heard it last week in Galway in relation to a project which I won't mention, but it was in the musical area. PPPs, excellent.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no evidence whatsoever. And quite the contrary, in fact. They're more expensive, as one would see. So my question, I have a few specific questions. I come back to the Department of Education. What is the longest contract entered into?
25 years.
Is that the longest?
The M3 Cloney-Kell scheme is 45 years.
45 years. Which one is that?
The M3 Cloney-Kell scheme. Yeah. The Limerick Tunnel is 35 years.
So they're the two, what I would call the bad ones that you're not saying are bad. The ones that tie us into high traffic.
Long-term, absolutely long-term.
Yeah,
yes.
Against all advice on climate change and so on. But they're... Anyway, sorry, I beg your pardon, I interrupted you. Those two are 45?
45 and 35.
Okay.
The M50 upgrade, I think, was 35 as well. The other toll concession schemes, of which there are 7, then there were 30 years, and our more recent schemes are 25-year contracts.
All right. Okay. So now, just come back to schools for me. And if I look at this document prepared by the Parliamentary Budget Office, and they quote, "The increasing level of unitary payments which arise on PPP projects is an issue of concern for the education budget." And it goes on to say, given the large unitary charge in the budget for 25 schools built using the PPP model, so on, of the education capital expenditure of 704 million in 2016, 85 million or 12% was on PPP. Can you give us some clarification on that and the concern?
That's accurate, Deputy. The unitary charges, I think, is down to 10% for 2017, given the increase in our budget.
And it was 12% in
12% in 16,
yeah.
10% in 17 in terms of the proportion
yeah.
of our budget on unitary charges. I mean, we obviously operate within the overall government policy. We are cautious about having too high a proportion of our budget on unitary charges ourselves. At the same time, given the budget available to us, and I know this is an argument for the past, not for the future, given the budget available to us and the demand for school places, it was very important that we used diverse methods of delivery. I think 12% of our additional places over the last 7 years in the school system have been delivered through PPPs in 6% of projects, because obviously the projects are of scale. We still, while we're very happy with the engagement on the National Development Plan, of course, and very ambitious for delivery in the National Development Plan, clearly the funding in the National Development Plan doesn't kick in scale for a number of more years, and we are running with 2 more bundles of higher education PPPs.
How many colleges and schools?
11. 11 in the 2 bundles of higher education PPPs. And we also have Grange Gorman, which we're hoping to come to financial conclusion in the near future.
If I ask you, most of your PPPs are secondary schools, isn't that
right?
That's right,
yeah.
Okay. What's the direct comparison between a direct build and a PPP of a secondary school?
Well, I suppose this is part of what we'll have to look at, but when we did the public sector benchmarks...
No, I'm asking you that now.
Yeah.
Given the fact that 12% of your budget in 2016 was on PPPs.
When you say the direct comparison, the schools operate, but the PPP company takes responsibility for the cleaning and the caretaking.
No, I'll come back to that now in a second.
So therefore,
to build a secondary school in Galway City, we'll take Galway City out of it, we'll take the rural area.
As we have done.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Tell me what's the difference between a direct build of a secondary school and a build by PPP?
When you say that they build to the same overall building guidelines, so the schools built are quite similar. It's a design and build for obviously for a PPP. There would be different tendering arrangements in for traditional projects. I'm not sure you're asking me about the tendering difference, Deputy, or about the outcome difference.
No, I'm asking you just, we need schools. Yeah. We need a secondary school. What leads to the decision to do a PPS? I understand sort of government policy, lack of money, difficult economy, but in terms of value for money, which one is cheaper?
Well, the public sector benchmark would show that we need to come in below the public sector benchmark when we decide to go with any of the bundles of schools, and we have come in below the public sector benchmark on each of the bundles of schools that we have advanced, and we have obviously published the information in relation to the first three. So on that test, the value for money is in the PPP model. Obviously, we have to undertake the review process to check on that, and obviously there will be a completion time as well. The majority of the risk is the area we think where there are savings, but also there seem to be savings in the facilities management area as well.
What does a secondary school cost build? Roughly. Give me a range from.
Yeah. So if we take a 1,000 pupil second level school, the construction cost with 2 special needs units is about 20.5 million.
20.5 million.
20.5 million.
A school euros. For 1,000 pupils with 2. Okay. So, is that by PPP?
No, that's the construction cost.
Just construction. So, what would a PPP cost for that over 25 years?
Well, again, that is speculative. I could give you examples of bundles of schools and what they have been costed.
I understand where you come from, and I understand there's a policy here, and I understand that the EU have put us in a situation with fiscal rules. Things have to be shown off balance sheet, and all sorts of magical accountancy rules that don't seem to be applied to direct public housing. But for me, for somebody listening, if you're going down a PPS, what is the cost of the school under a PPS? What is paid over the 25 years to the private company?
Well, we don't do it for individual schools, Deputy. We do it for groups of schools. So I could talk through the amount that we do on any bundle of schools, because we have all that information and we have given it to the committee.
So they're put into a bundle to facilitate the PPS over 20 million and so on. Okay. All right.
And I suppose the availability of finance was a major issue in past years and will remain a major issue in the higher education area in the next few years. The policy that Mr. Watt has described will obviously apply to the longer term NDP investment that we have to have.
Right. I suppose it was never an issue for banks, money was never an issue when it came to government policy, but that's government policy. But it's an issue for direct build of schools or direct build of the necessary things that we need for a civilised society. But just in relation to roads, I want the N17 to N18 Gart to Tuam. And I mentioned this because on many levels it brings up lots of things. That was very much welcomed in Galway as coming in before time, and we all hailed it. We came in before time. And then I look at all of this. So I see it came in 5 months earlier. It was 550 million for 53 kilometres. There were savings in relation to the refinancing. That was great. But then there were variations which cost more. And then we have an audit from the EU which says documentation wasn't handed over. I'm going to find that now in a second and quote it here. Then there was a legal action. Then there was a huge delay in the procurement of 5 years. So this particular project raises a whole load of issues, doesn't it, for PPPs. Yeah. So it came in on time, yet it cost more in a variation. I don't know who's going to answer me on this.
Maybe, yeah.
The audit from the EU says the requested documentation, they just refused to hand it over. Now, who refused to hand over what?
Well, I take the questions, Deputy, if that's okay. It came in, it certainly did. The construction of the scheme came in ahead of schedule, and it opened.
5 years, the procurement of that took considerably longer.
The procurement was definitely bogged down because what happened there, Deputy, was we'd got to a stage where we were appointing, we'd preferred tender appointed. Yeah. And then we had the financial crash.
Right.
The funders would not come into the market to fund the private sector bid to build the scheme. Yeah. We had to engage with the European Commission in terms of progressing the scheme. How could we do it in terms of the procurement process? We didn't want to have to go back and start the whole entire process again. Okay. So it went from 2010, and it was in 2014 we awarded that contract. 2014. Okay. We had a significant downtime because of the funding crisis. Had that not happened, Deputy, the scheme would have been built long before that kind of thing. But once we got over that hurdle, and obviously NDFA, I'm looking to my right here, they were our financial advisors in this. We eventually did get funders to come back into the market. It was a very limited pool of banks were willing to fund at that point in time. It was mentioned earlier about additional schemes. These schemes were delivered during a difficult time for the economy. It certainly gave a lot of jobs in the west of Ireland at a difficult time for the economy, kind of thing. So yes, it was very difficult. The procurement was very difficult in getting the scheme.
So that took 5 years for some of the reasons you're outlining.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Then
You mentioned variations.
Variations, yeah.
Variations are things that we determine ourselves, or people may suggest, but there are things that we would look at and would want to apply to a scheme.
Yeah.
So, I don't know all the variations on the scheme, but I do know there was a junction whereby an improved layout had to be considered. So it was a requirement over and above what the PPPs had bid for.
Okay.
So we specified that, and it was because it came to light that maybe the initial design wasn't quite going to be as good as we would have liked it to be.
Yeah.
If we want additional signage, I think we had additional lighting requirements, whatnot, or we, again, from an environmental consideration, there was changes on lighting requirements. I don't want to be, I won't talk too much, but variations are things that we instruct.
That happen.
Yes, and that happened to any road scheme,
Okay.
if it was traditionally procured or PPP procured.
Okay, so finishing up.
Speaker in the report.
And you mentioned, sorry, your last comment, if you want, on the cooperation with the report, we did meet with the European Court of Auditors when they arrived in Dublin.
Page 52.
Yes.
Although the European Commission's investment in the Marguerite Fund falls under the Irish authorities refused to provide us the PSC and they refused to provide us the PSC and the tender dossier for the N17-18 motorway project, which were also not available at the Commission. Accordingly, the rationale in designing and procuring the project and in choosing the PPP option instead of alternative procurement methods such as traditional procurement and concession could not be assessed. Now, that's just come out this week. So how could that be? How could that be? Just as an example now of accountability.
The European Court of Auditors came on the Public Expenditure Reform might want to comment as well. They came on the basis of having given EU funds to the scheme.
Yes.
There were no EU funds given to the scheme, Deputy. And we engaged with the Department of Public Expenditure Reform, and the view was that they had no basis for the audit as they had set out. They came in looking for our documents, but they had not funded the scheme. What they had done was they provided funding to an equity provider who was contributing to the private sector side on the scheme. We met with them. We brought them down. They went down. They got a site visit of the scheme. We provide them with a full overview of the process we undertake. They were made aware of all the documentation that's available in terms of guidelines and whatnot. Yes.
You didn't give them the documentation. The documentation wasn't handed over, and you're saying the reason for that is they didn't fund. They gave money to a private. They gave equity to a private company within that. So there was no obligation on you to give.
Well, and with respect, if any of the banks or any of the funders come in and said, "Can we see all your documents now?" I think I'd be saying they're not really for them. They're for they're public documents. They did not have a basis for the audit. I might ask if the Department of Expenditure want to comment on it too, because I know we engaged closely with them in terms of what our obligations were, and we were advised by the Department of Public Expenditure Reform. So.
Okay, Grant.
But just on that, you can see how difficult it is for us when we're reading this and the audit is telling us that no documentation was handed over. But I've run out of time, but you can see.
Okay, thanks very much.
Very much. I think the debate should take place in the Dáil. I think our role is to highlight the issues in addition to the Controller and Auditor General, so that proper facts and information feed a debate in the Dáil that would lead to a proper policy. And I think that's the difficulty. I don't blame you for that. I think there has been no backup for the policy. It was an ad hoc reaction for a particular ideological reason in relation to difficulties in the economy. And we're here today and we can say that there's good value for money. But just the 10%, I just want to ask practical questions. The 10%, and it's a significant change. That ceiling is gone, is that right? Yeah, and so it's gone back to each department. And so Mr. O'Fowler, what was the price of the school that you gave me this morning when I asked for, was it
20 million.
20 million.
20 million for a 1,000 pupil post-primary
20 million to build a secondary school for a 1,000. So if we use that then, Mr. Watt, the Department of Education will show that as an upfront cost, is that right, as opposed to over the 25 years?
So two issues, Deputy. So when we account for it in cash terms in the future, the appropriation account of the department will show the unitary payment over the 25-year period of the school. But when it comes to us comparing the projects for accounting purposes in the short run, we will Secretary General Fowler, the Department of Education, they have an envelope over the next number of years of X amount. So if they decide to do a PPP project instead of a traditionally procured project, the capital cost of that will be set against their capital envelope, as if we had procured it traditionally, even if they go down the route of a PPP. So in effect, the Department of Education won't be able to spend that money again. If they decide to go down the route of a PPP, they can't spend the money again because that will take up some of the envelope that's set out for the department. So in effect, there's a difference here between the cash accounting, which is the unitary payment for a PPP, and then the notional accounting when it comes to our rules in terms of how we manage envelopes when it comes to these projects.
So the restriction on the PPP will be in terms of the capital budget for the department in question?
So the affordability cap, which was there in terms of PPPs, that's been lifted, and that's not been lifted, it's gone. Okay. But the cap now is in terms of how does the capital cost of that project fit in within the envelope that has been assigned to Department X.
And so just using the example that you gave of the 20 million to build a school, which seems extraordinarily high, I have to say, but I'm no expert, so I'll just leave the fact alone for a moment. And then there are payments that you pay off the developer over a 25-year period, and then the school is handed back to the Department of Education. And what happens then with maintenance? No school has come back yet, I presume.
No.
Okay.
Let's say it's 5 schools, because that would be a bundle, 100 million approximately, maybe.
And so
that gets handed back.
Yeah.
Typically,
which 5 schools are due to come back?
Yeah, the first group of schools. So say we had 5 second-level schools. Yeah. The first ones that were from 2002 come back in 2027. Yeah. The department will own those typically. Yeah. It'll be on land that we own, and we will have, just as we have with other new schools we build, we will lease the use of that to the trustees for the schools in question, and then they would have to come back into the way schools outside of PPPs operate, and we would fund them for caretaker services and for maintenance and so on. And
is there an option in any of those contracts for the company that has the contract to stay on, or are they all coming back to you?
They're all coming back to us.
They're all coming back to you. Okay. And just then, in terms of the sharing of the revenue, and obviously that was built into some of the contracts for the schools, but I see that no revenue came back. I think your comment is that there was very poor uptake. I'm delighted, because I thought it was a very bad idea, but I think there's acknowledgement that there was a poor uptake on people using schools outside of the educational system.
I think the issue is it's the profit will come back. So schools get a certain number of hours. I think it's 300 or 400 a year outside of school time, and then any usage after that. Obviously, the issue is there can be usage after that which pays the costs, but it's the usage after that that makes a profit, and then splitting where the profits go. And that's been quite limited. But that doesn't mean there hasn't been usage. It just means there's been limited profits. I understand that you've stated that there has been limited third-party use of the schools. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay, so revenue didn't come back that way? No. Okay. No. So again, here was a criteria that was being used to sell the PPP, which really was without foundation, really. I'm delighted, I have to tell you, because I think it was very bad. I think a school should be used for the community and never for profit. But that was a criteria that was set as. Well, why you should. It would be one of the range of possibilities. But to say it was a criteria or a requirement. Obviously, outside of school usage, all schools, it's good that they're used outside of school time
by the community.
By the community, absolutely. And we have some different arrangements in place with local authorities to encourage school usage as well. And it's something that we're really striving to do. It's a matter for the school. We've issued encouragement through circulars for schools to do that. We're seeking to encourage them to have after-school care generally, school completion funded by the Department of Children, and TUSLA operates in schools and so on school premises. They're all really good things. And we wanted to continue that in the context of PPPs, but we wanted schools to have the first call on the hours, obviously. So there was after that...
and pay for those hours?
No.
Free?
No, free. Yeah.
Okay. Now, in relation to the revenue coming from the National Conference Centre, who's going to deal with that? Just in relation to the revenue that was due back, I understand that was quite a sizable revenue back, 2.4 million in 2013, and then 14, 15, 16, there was no revenue. Who monitors the revenue?
Chair, it's the OPW.
Responsibility. There's nobody from the OPW?
No.
So you've no role in that at all?
We helped them whenever requested, and we're doing some contract management on some of the technical services for them, but we're not monitoring the contract.
Yeah. See, again, I don't understand that. Here we have the National Conference Centre, and if the threshold exceeds a certain level, money is due back to the taxpayer, presumably. And it came back, some of it came back in 2013, some of it had to go for, I'm not going into the minutiae of it. But then in 14, 15, 16, no revenue share was paid, was available for the Office of Public Works. Nobody can do that, no.
Because the performance of the centre wasn't as good in those years.
Yeah, but who assesses, Mr. Watt, the performance?
The OPW. The OPW are managers of the contract, so they had a responsibility for managing that.
I think performance forms part of the contract, and there are very complicated and specific performance targets, cost implications, revenue implications, and so on. So this is why it's important to have contract managers who know the detail of the contract and who monitor it.
Does the Office of Public Works have a contract manager? Do they have enough staff to do that?
I can't say just offhand, but certainly they would be involved in detail in contract managing. And as you can see, there were figures that were available.
Yeah.
But the first call on surpluses were to meet rates.
I saw that, but
Rates
then there's
bids.
14, 15, 16, and there's nothing at all. So.
Yeah, I mean, in fact, they're the international conference delegates, which is the key metric for performance for the National Convention Centre, was ahead of target in that period.
Okay.
But it's not that if you were ahead of target, you had to be substantially ahead of target to generate a surplus. It's kind of, there's an element of, or a space there for the private sector operator to generate a certain element of extra profit, and it's when it becomes a super profit, if you want to call it. Yeah, that the revenue sharing or the revenue split comes into play.
Okay. Just going back to the GART Tuam Road, and I reread that over lunch. And the European Commission, the fund, the Marguerite Fund, under the regulation, the 10T regulation, their interpretation of that regulation, it provides for the court's audit rights even in a case where the beneficiary is a private partner. So you're disagreeing with that? Is that right? This is what's set out now in the audit report. I might be taking you at a disadvantage because you haven't read it, but they're clearly setting out, even in a situation where there's a private partner, which you mentioned already, but the funding is coming under that fund, the Marguerite Fund, and no documents...
In that particular case, the beneficiary was a private partner.
Yes.
Because it was the PPP company who got the investment.
No, I understand all that. My question is... Yeah.
Just to explain, the EU, the European Court of Auditors, their role is to audit EU money and who gets the EU money. Yeah. So the Irish government got no EU money under that PPP project. The EU money went to the PPP company.
I heard that from Mr. Kennedy.
So that's why what the EU Court of Auditors wanted to do then was they wanted to look at what the Irish government had done with its own money in making a decision as to whether to procure that project by PPP or not.
Isn't that relevant?
There was no EU money, and we got our own legal advice. And because there was no EU money involved, the remit of the EU Court of Auditors didn't extend to government decisions that the Irish government made with its own money. So on that basis, we were helpful in terms of showing them the project, but we didn't show them the decision-making process that went on in Ireland because it's not covered by their remit.
But isn't that the crucial thing for us, how you make it?
Sorry, that's a matter that our Controller and Auditor General can examine into, but not the EU.
Just one second now. Just one second. They clearly have a different opinion than you when you go back and read the report. It's set out at page 52.
They do, and we asked them to explain that opinion and they couldn't. Okay. They couldn't give us any reason why they would have a remit.
Just one second. They've clearly a different opinion than you, that there is an obligation when you get funding under this fund, and notwithstanding that it's a third party, it's a private company. You're saying, we don't accept that?
Yes.
Okay. And is that where it rests? You said,
yes.
No, we're not giving, that's where it rests.
And our legal advice is that we wouldn't be covered under government rules and Official Secrets Act and so on to divulge that kind of information to someone who has no right to have access to it.
Okay, just of all these projects, and how many? It was sort of 1999 where the PPP started, was it, for Ireland around the turn of the century? How many projects would we have completed in that length of time?
think there's about 25.
Excluding the local authority ones, yeah, which were there was a substantial number there, 30, yeah.
40 or 50 of them.
30, 40, 50.
Yeah, and then you have the waste.
Yeah.
You think?
Well, including both water and wastewater.
But within this room, you're talking about how many? 20? 27. And I think the misunderstanding maybe was, I think the Controller and Auditor General referred to 10. There's actually 11 reviews done. One of them is the courts and the other 10 are transport. So it's 11 in total that has been done. Now, so if we take this one in just using it as an example, where, as I say, it was, everybody gave a great praise because it came in under time, wouldn't it have been a perfect opportunity to say to the court, the auditors, look, this is why we made this decision. It's worked out much cheaper, and just we'll give over the information. They asked you for it.
It's just not part of our business. So that's really, we didn't have any basis on which to share Irish government papers with the European Court of Auditors.
I just find that, maybe I'm naive, but this was a golden opportunity to show how you make decisions in relation to going for a public-private partnership as opposed to direct.
Well, we just don't voluntarily give Irish government papers to European auditors where there's no European money involved.
You see, well, that ties in, if we start again this morning, you don't voluntarily give anything until you're actually forced.
Well, no, but
I know you're
that's a
shaking
role for our government's Controller and Auditor General, and that's where that policy falls.
Right. You're not coming in on that Controller and Auditor General at this point, though?
No, sorry? I could get the papers if I wanted them or I needed them for a purpose. No, well, I haven't asked for them. So, but I know that if I wanted to examine the business case that was made, I could seek the papers and I would expect to receive them. And I'm sure I would receive them. Yeah.
And the European Court of Auditors didn't ask you to get them to hand them on to them?
They drew to our attention that there was a difficulty, but it would not be appropriate for me to ask for papers for a purpose other than that for which I am entitled to ask for them.
But they did seek that backdoor option?
No, I wouldn't say that they sought the back door, but they made me aware that they had asked for papers and they weren't getting them.
But if you had got the papers and done a report, that report would have been made public?
It would be made public, yes.
So they could have got the report then?
Well, no, I wouldn't necessarily publish the public sector benchmark, but the significant information, obviously, would be... I have reported on a number of PPPs, and I have given considerable detail about how a decision was made to proceed with the PPP. So I would presumably have gone through the same process if I had looked at the GART, and I may do it yet. So.
You made it, I think, at some stage during your opening speech that each PPP will be judged on a one-by-one basis from now on. Is that different from bundles, or what does that mean?
So, again, it comes back to this point, Deputy, about the accounting treatment, about whether we have the affordability cap as a percentage of the unity payments, percentage of the capital, or whether we apply the capital cost of the projects over the number of years. So it's that point I was making, that when it comes to the incentives facing departments and choosing between the PPP or an exchequer, they'd be like for like, they'd be treated exactly the same when it comes to the accounting treatment. That's the point I was making.
Just final two things. Health centres and the bundle, will they come back like schools to the state, to be owned by the state?
Yes. The delivery of 14 primary care centres, actually 7 of them are already handed back to the HSE for operations, and the other 7 will be delivered over the next couple of months. And at the end of the...
It's owned by the state?
The state always remains ownership of the site,
yes.
And we issue a licence out to the PPP to operate it, and they get paid on monthly instalments over 25 years, less deductions if the facilities are not available to the standards required.
Okay, because that's different in Galway, in the eastern side of the city, where we're paying a rent over a $250,000. It's a primary care centre. Okay. And finally, just yourselves in relation to the National Development Finance Aid, you seem to have a huge role in monitoring, reviewing, learning, going out procuring, and so on. Isn't that right? Do you also source finance?
We advise on the optimal means of financing.
To who do you advise?
We advise on the state side, of course.
Yes.
Yeah, on the state side. We're not, because we're expecting for these transactions for the private sector to arrange its own finance. That's the whole deal here. They have to come up with a finance to fund the project.
So it's the state.
From the finance, and what they would propose to us, we would review that. See, is it at market? Is it competitive? And are we happy with the arrangements they're putting in place?
Okay. And final question then. You see all this monitoring, there's the DEPR, there's the central unit within DEPR, there's yourselves, there's each department. Who looks then at the direct build? Where is there a unit? Do you cover that, or you just do PPPs?
We just do the PPPs.
So who does the analysis of the direct build, when I say the direct build, without going through a PPP?
So the policy in relation to capital spending, capital planning is set by our department, and we work with the relevant departments and agencies in terms of delivering on capital plans that we have, whether it's hospitals or schools or roads or whatever.
So we have this team here, and we have yourselves, and we have a central unit. Who does that for the public spend directly on a hospital, on a health centre?
So we're responsible for central policy in relation to capital.
The policy?
Yeah, and then the HSE will be responsible for capital works in respect of the.
So each whoever it is.
Each department or body, depending deputy on the area.
I just ask a few questions.